All right, hello. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make this video, not because the last one did poorly or anything. The last one, I called it a tutorial, but really I should have called it an overview. I'll probably fix that in a second. But the last video that I made was just like, oh, I discovered how to do this thing and want to share that with everyone else in case other people experience the same problems I had. So at least they'll have something to go on if they're trying to, say, create a little pathfinding point and click thing for the first time. But as for what was I saying? Yeah, so at this point I figure it would be good to create videos to simply track my progress with this little pet project that I'm doing. Just because excuse me. Because if I ever take a break from it and need to start from scratch or something for any reason, if something goes wrong, this way I'll have something to kind of review for my own progress. So to start things off, in this walkable area, we have the background texture. That's everything that you see in the background. Let me just switch that off and on so you can kind of get a bit of an idea of what we're working with. It's something that I drew up in Krita. Some nice free software. I used my Helion tablet, which is cheap. It's like $30. I think it's not really industry standard, but it's it's something I've been using for a while and it gets the job done. You'll notice there are these kind of isometric tiles. If you look up isometric tile graph paper, if you just Google that or search that in your favorite search engine, you'll find some images that allow you to kind of get this nice spread, especially if you can find one that has a transparent background. So yeah, isometric tile graph paper. It's good stuff. And then I just kind of drew over that to get this result. Then you'll notice these objects right here also. Technically, they are in the background. If I turn off props, you'll see I actually baked them into the background. That's not a good way of doing it, but it's not the worst way of doing things either, I don't think. It'll probably cause problems down the road if you do it, if you make that mistake consistently, but I'm sure it's fine here. And then as you saw just now, tile map layer is still active. I haven't used any of the red tiles just because I don't really want to until I have a specific purpose for them. Just because the purpose of the green tiles is to have the physics layer, I think it is. Navigation layer, that's it. So the green tiles is just a 16 by 16, just kind of green pixels painted over this to have a navigation layer. Works very nicely. Keep it invisible. And then the next thing down is the cursor. I have changed it from the last video. In the last video, I just had the same texture that I used to create the tile map layer, just as kind of a placeholder. But for this, since I was already drawing stuff up in Krita, I decided to draw a little cursor also. So that's very nice. Then we have these props. Each one is simply a sprite, and then it has a little area 2D/collision in front of it. So this way the player won't just fly through it or whatever. It also helps that for the sprites I have Y sort enabled turned on. This is one of the bigger changes coming from the last video into this one, is that for all of the objects and characters, I've gone ahead and turned on Y sort enabled. I sort of realized it doesn't really need to be done for everything. It's mainly the sprites that need it, or that have needed it in order to make this thing work. So if that's a useful tip, then there you go. And then the next thing is building event. We have a little get player collision. That's this big circle right here. You can see there's a little script attached to that, along with a node linked into it. We will get into that later, but I want to go over the player character before getting into how the building event works. And we also have player goal, that's this little square right here. And then we have building look, which is a hidden sprite that's put over the building. Basically what this means, I can show it off in a second, but what it means is that the camera, which I have down here, once the building event triggers, it will pan from the player character all the way up to the sprite. And since the sprite will be invisible, it will just pan up to the building. Then next is, if you remember in the last video, we had the goal for the NPC. So that's this over here. The NPC is down here, so let's just kind of walk over. And then for the NPC, I don't think there are any big changes from the last script to this one. Yeah, I don't think so with the NPC character. It's pretty much all the same stuff. Then we also have the camera, and a few of the defaults are changed on it. As you can see, it's zoomed in a bit so that it won't be too broad of a scope. So the zoom over here. We have the limits set. Basically, it's just the dimensions of the game area. So if you want these numbers, you can just put left and top to 0, and then look in the project settings, display window, just look at the viewport width and the viewport height. That's basically the numbers I took, and it works pretty well. I've also smoothed it out so that whenever you get to the edge, it'll kind of smoothly come to a stop. We also have position smoothing enabled, and I've reduced it from 5 pixels to 1 so that it'll be a nice pan over whenever the camera moves. And then the position is wherever the player character is at to start with. Then the scale has been reduced, I guess. I don't remember why I did that, but I'm sure there are reasons for that. I think that's it for the camera. One thing that I should point out with both the PC and the player characters is that I've changed their collision shape so that instead of covering the whole sprite, it just covers the bottom. This is most useful when you're doing something like isometric stuff or any kind of 2D where your character is more of a almost like one of those like little character stands that you use for D&D. That's basically what this is. And then let's see. And yeah, I remember. Oh, that's another good thing to point out, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. Another thing that I've changed for a lot of these items is the z-index. So for the cursor, the z-index is set to 0. That way, whenever you're exploring, we'll actually show this off in a bit. But if you try to go on top of the objects or on top of the player or the NPC, it'll just kind of slide under them. This kind of gives the illusion that this is 3-dimensional instead of 2D, just because the way it doesn't overlap over anything, it gives the illusion that you're actually clicking on the ground instead of on the viewport, if that makes sense. So that's why the z-index for that is set to 0, Y-sort is enabled. And yet for the props, like the building and stuff like that, the z-index is set to 1. So for each individual prop, and then also for the NPC and the player character, all of those have a z-index of 1, and Y-sort is enabled on all of the sprites. I think that's all I want to say about that. Okay, then the player script has changed quite a bit. You'll remember in the last video we had a var called slowing. I've changed it to stopping because it's more accurate. We now have machine states, which is this. That's not what I wanted to do. These two things right here. Enumerator S stands for state. It's sort of a quick reference. We have exploring, looking, and waiting, and then we have var state, which is what the player state currently is. I'll link the explanation for that I found in the description of this video. Then we also have a variable for direction sprite, which is currently just the sprite that we're using for the player. The reason why I have this is because if you ever, if we ever get to the point where this actually becomes an isometric game, there will be times where, you know, you can look this way, that way, that way, or that way. And there will be times where if you're having a conversation with a specific character, say the NPC was right here, you would want the player to be looking that way. Or once we get over here and the player is looking at this, we'll want the player to be facing in that direction. So that's what the direction sprite is. Basically, it's a quick thing to switch over to whenever the player is focused on a specific object or character. Let's see, we have stopping. And then we have two onReady vars. The first one is the cursor. If you remember from the last video, to get things like the cursor or the camera, you can just click and drag from the scene tree into the script. Very useful. So we have one for the cursor, and then we also have one for the camera as an easy reference. One thing that you may notice is that the camera is outside of the player. If the camera was inside the player tree, the camera would simply follow the player the entire time, which makes it very difficult to pan the camera over to other objects or things. Because then you would only be able to like push the camera in that direction. So by having the camera outside of the player tree, you can simply set the camera position to the player position, and then once you want to focus on something else, you can change the camera position to the thing you want to focus on. I'll show you where in the script we have that in a second. And then we also have an export var goal. This is so that whenever the player is looking at something specific, you can switch the player state over to looking, and then have the goal just be where the player walks over to. I'll show you how that works in a second. Okay, then function ready. We didn't have that before, but for this, the state is exploring. And then we have switch state, this function right here. This is new. Basically, this is what we use in order to very quickly switch the player state. We have the switch to, which is the state that we'll be switching to. And if relevant, we'll also have the goal and the focus. The goal will be where the player walked towards if they are looking at something. And the focus will be where the camera pans over to. And if neither of these are relevant, then these can just be set to null. So in this, we have a little match statement that is Godot script's version of case statements, case switch statements, switch case, that's it. So we have exploring, looking, waiting. So it'll just take this. If the string is one of these, it'll switch over. If the state is looking specifically, then the cursor will disappear. The camera position will go over to the object that we're focusing on. The goal node will be set from here to the player's goal object, and then the player's target position will be that. According to the navigation agent. Next, we have movement, which some of this is going to be familiar, some of this isn't. This whole thing that we had before is all from the previous video. The main difference, I think, is the camera position is now focused on the player at the top. But now we have it all contained within this statement if the current state is exploring. So basically the exploring state is what we're typically going to see, where you can click around and the player will go over to wherever we've clicked. Another thing that has been changed, before we just had if stopping, the target position will just be the mouse position. That has changed because we want the player to stand on top of the cursor rather than in front of it. So now we've adjusted things so that both Y and X can be accounted for separately. This way we can prop things up a bit on the Y axis to make the destination taller than the cursor, basically. Not taller, higher, excuse me. Then, let's see, I think that's all we have for that. Otherwise, the cursor just stays in place until the player walks over to it. I think most of this stuff is the same as before, but now we have so we've accounted for if exploring, but now we have if the state is looking. Now all of the script for looking is going to be very familiar because it's basically the same script that is baked into the NPC movement, this right here. It's just that kind of copied over. With minimal differences, because when the state is looking, we want the player to move over to the goal object so that the player will be in the right place when they're looking at the thing. I'll show you what that looks like in a second. I think the only difference is now we have the direction sprite, which is this thing up here. I've already explained why we would want to be able to change that. I don't really have the code specifically. Let's see, do we? Oh, wait. Okay, we don't yet. Yeah, I don't have the code in place specifically for switching out the sprite to look in the right direction, but at least it's in here for some of it is complete for when we want to finish that. Okay, I think that's about everything I wanted to go over as far as updates go. And yeah, honestly, this bit right here should probably be in the NPC's script also, in case we want the NPC to be looking around or anything like that. We can swap out the sprite, change the direction, that type of thing. But yeah, I think that's about it. I'm not really seeing any extra stuff. I think I made some adjustments on the idle, which is the little orange square that basically is like once the player has reached wherever the mouse is, the player can go ahead and stop moving. That's basically what this orange square means. Again, I think we went over that before, but I've just adjusted the proportions of both the player's collision shape and the idle orange square collision shape. All right, with all that explanation out of the way, let's go ahead and run this. So this part should be familiar. When the player approaches the NPC will stop and wait politely until the player leaves in order to continue moving. Also, we can walk behind the NPC now because the collision objects for the player and the NPC are rooted at the bottom. Those are those little rectangles instead of covering the whole thing. So now it's like they're standing up rather than being tiles placed on the floor or whatever. So once we move out of the way, the NPC will continue. It is a pretty big circle though, so it's like, just because the whole point is that you are in its line of sight. So it's like if you want to talk to this person, you know, we want to make that very easy for them to approach. Now I have been clicking and dragging for movement a lot. I should point out that you can also just click wherever you want to go and the player character will just find a path over there. So that's really cool. And again, sorry, I'm starting to and a lot because I'm trying to think of all the stuff I want to say. What makes the getting in front of or behind a sprite possible is the Y sorting. See, I think there's a tutorial on that I can also link into the description. Then with the fountain, we have the same Y sorting. And since everything is an index of 1, the cursor goes underneath things instead of on top of them. Makes it look a little bit better. Now let's do the big thing, which is the little cutscene thingy. So as you can see, we walked up into the circle that activated the event. Oh, I don't think I went over the event script. Shoot, okay. Let's go over that real quick and then we'll show you that again. So get player is the area right here and it has its own script. Let's look into that. Yeah, it's pretty simple stuff. We have the player set to an on-ready variable. So again, just click and drag the player into this. And even if we make the player as like its own scene, it should still be fine as long as the names match up. And the reason why there are extra dots and slashes is because it's having to reach out of its parent and pull the player in that way. But again, just, yeah. All right, and then we have the function onBodyEntered. That's this one right here. So when the player character enters the area, the player's switch state will have their state switched, excuse me, to looking. The place that the player will walk to, so the goal will be this object right here, which was just clicked and dragged in. And then building look, that's where we want the camera to pan over to, will be the hidden sprite, so the camera's position will shift over like that. So yeah, that's all that's going on there. Let's just show that off again. And there we go, yeah. All right, that's all the progress that I've made with this so far. I'm hoping to incorporate more stuff pretty soon. Things like being able to click on objects to interact with them. Maybe like have a inventory system, skill checks. I'm not entirely sure what features I want to implement into this, if I want to lean more towards a point and click experience or more of a role-playing experience. So hopefully I'll make another video on that soon to show off to y'all later. All right, I think that's it. Thank you for joining me on this.